So we are going to be, everyone's heard about ScratchJr and Scratch, and we don't have that many pathways right now to lead children from ScratchJr to Scratch. So today we're going to be talking a little bit more about how we can support children that have kind of gotten everything out of ScratchJr that they need and how they can grow into Scratch. So we are from the DevTech research group, and the DevTech research group is the co-creators of ScratchJr along with the Scratch Foundation. And in addition to working on technologies, DevTech also works on a bunch of different things around those technologies. So pedagogy for the classroom, curriculum, activities, everything like that that can kind of support a child while using ScratchJr or some of the other technologies that we work with. So today we're going to be talking about some of the resources we have around transitioning a child from ScratchJr to Scratch. So my name is Jess Blake West. I am the program coordinator from DevTech, and I will be the primary facilitator for the session.
My name is Tess Levinson, and I'm a PhD student at the DevTech research group.
And I'm Madeline Rivera, and I'm the ScratchJr educator.
Fantastic. So before we get into it, I'll go over a little bit more about what we'll be talking about today. So right now, we're just welcoming everyone, getting to know each other and introducing where we're from. And then we'll go into a little bit more about Scratch and ScratchJr, how they were made, where they come from, and what they look like. And then we'll start talking about the children transitioning. So how do we know when a child is ready to transition from ScratchJr to Scratch? What kind of skills should we look for? And what kinds of things should they be doing on ScratchJr already that signal to us that they're ready to move to Scratch? Then we'll talk a little bit more about how to actually facilitate that transition, maybe conversations to have with the children before or introductory materials to give them. And then we'll take part in a transition activity. So we'll go over this activity that you could give to children, and then Maddie will do a demonstration as our ScratchJr educator, and we'll kind of talk through different things to emphasize during that activity. And then finally, we will share and reflect. And throughout all of this, we encourage you to engage, and Tess will tell us a little bit more about how you can engage during the session. You're muted, Tess.
So you are all already on SwapCard, and we have the SwapCard chat where you can engage, ask questions, engage with each other. We also have ScratchJr Connect and Scratch, where you can post projects and share your own projects as you follow along. And finally, we'd love for you to engage with us on Twitter at DevTech Research and at ScratchJr, and with the hashtag ScratchJr2Scratch.
Great, thanks so much. And I'll add a little bit on ScratchJr Connect, because we'll talk about how ScratchJr itself is not an online community. ScratchJr Connect was our response to that. It's for teachers and parents to share out either projects and examples or different activities. So just so you know, ScratchJr Connect is our online community, but focused more on the adults. Okay. So a little bit more about both programs. So Scratch, as I'm sure everyone knows, is the world's largest coding community and coding language for children 8+. It can be used on any device with internet access, and it's really a way to facilitate and promote creative coding and playful learning. So it's a block-based editor, it's very visual, it's all animation output, it's great. And we have ScratchJr. ScratchJr has a lot of the same things as Scratch, but it's designed for children 5 to 8. So what we found from some of our research at DevTech is that back, 2011, 2012, before ScratchJr existed, we did find that children as young as 5 can engage with computational thinking and different programming concepts like loops and sequencing and debugging, but they need the appropriate tools. And Scratch, as wonderful as it is, isn't quite there for children ages 5 to 8. So we needed a tool that was there for children that maybe weren't able to read yet, maybe needed a little more simplifying, and maybe didn't need as many distractions and complex concepts going on. So that's where ScratchJr was born. Another difference between ScratchJr and Scratch is ScratchJr is designed originally for the tablet. So while there are directions of going web-based for Scratch Junior, as well as being available on Chromebooks. For the most part, Scratch Junior was designed as a tablet app. And so that's a big difference between the two, is that Scratch Junior is originally a tablet app and Scratch is a website. And that ties into the final difference that I'll talk about a little bit, as I already said throughout this session, is that Scratch is an online coding community, whereas Scratch Junior is much more personal to that device. So children's projects stay on that device for the most part, and there's much less interaction with peers on the internet. You can email your projects to teachers and parents and interact that way, but for the most part, the interaction is fairly limited, and that's one of the significant differences between Scratch Junior and Scratch. So looking more at the two interfaces next to each other, I'll start by pointing out the similarities. So the main similarity is that all of the outputs here are with cat and kitten, and their animations, and they're fun, and they're on the stage, and you can see everything as you code it. So you make a program and you get to watch it right in front of you. So the visual block-based programming stays true in Scratch Junior as it is for Scratch. Let's see, some other differences are the blocks are color organized, both on Scratch Junior and Scratch, helping to kind of understand different concepts in different categories and things like that. And then in terms of just the way the blocks work, they still snap together, they still run through a sequence, they're all very visual. But now let's look at some of the differences. So the primary difference, I would say, as we said, for children's 5 to 8, they might not be able to read yet. And so Scratch, on all of the blocks, the functions are communicated through words, whereas Scratch Junior, it's entirely icon based. So Scratch Junior, while there are ways to see what the blocks are with natural language, for the most part, just icons, and it's completely accessible to children that can't yet read. Another one of the differences is that Scratch goes top to bottom, like many other programming languages, in the sequence that you'd put things together. Scratch Junior goes left to right. And the reason for this is because we're teaching Scratch Junior in parallel to literacy. Children ages 5 to 8, those are the primary ages when children are typically learning to read, at least in the Western education system. So we were very cognizant of that when creating Scratch Junior and wanted to make sure that we were putting this programming language that we were introducing with Scratch Junior and natural language that children were learning in English class and reading and from reading picture books, etc., putting them next to each other and kind of showing the similarities between the two. They're both ways to express yourself and communicate things. It's a way to represent thoughts in a concrete way. One is just on Scratch Junior and one is with pen and paper. So other than top down, left to right, there's a little bit more of like organization change. You see that the stage is over to the side, but for the most part, they're fairly similar. Scratch just has a wider breadth of things that you can do with it. Which leads me perfectly into my next slide of what can you do with Scratch. So Scratch Junior is fantastic and you can do a lot with it. And so some might ask, why even transition to Scratch? Scratch Junior is great. We've got all the broadcasting and everything like that. We've got pages. It's fun. We're good. Let's stick where we're comfortable. But no, we want to introduce why Scratch is a great place to grow. So when a child is 8 and making these fantastic interactive programs on Scratch Junior, instead of staying comfortable there, let's introduce this newer, wider area where they can explore. So some examples of that are the sound library. So on Scratch Junior, while children do love lots of sounds, it can also be very distracting for that age group and their attention span. So we actually limit the amount of sounds on Scratch Junior. They can make their own sounds and they can make the pop noise. With Scratch, they can do whatever they want. There's many, or not whatever they want, but there's many sounds. They can import their own sounds. And there's just kind of, it's indicative of how many ways you can kind of get creative and show your own ideas on Scratch, a little more so than on Scratch Junior. Another way would be the sensors. So with Scratch Junior, there's really no opportunity for kind of other sort of sensors other than like start on tap and conditionals like that. With Scratch, it gets into many more, so smell and hearing and things like that. And then finally, you can create your own functions on Scratch. So those are just a few examples, but all in all, Scratch kind of takes Scratch Junior's world and just expands it. There's more to do in many different directions. And then also there's much more complex concepts. And this was a really conscious decision to kind of scale back for Scratch Junior, because it can be really intimidating if half the things on the screen are not developmentally appropriate. So we wanted to make sure that we scaled the concepts for the right age groups. And so with Scratch Junior, they can do a little bit of conditionals, a little bit of repeat loops, but for the most part, it's pretty straightforward. Whereas with Scratch, they are introduced to different variables, randomization, the Cartesian coordinate grid, and then if and repeat until loops, things like that. And then finally, I've said this slightly as just more of a difference, but here we're kind of picturing it as a huge pro, is that Scratch is an online community. It's a great way for kids to interact with their peers or work together in classrooms. They can remix projects or remix other projects, and it's just a fantastic area of growth that children can have and just might not necessarily be ready for ages 5 to 8. Okay, so now we'll get into how to transition. And I will say that for the next couple of slides, we'll be following along with the general concepts that are covered in our Scratch Junior to Scratch curriculum. So as I said, DevTech does a lot of work around Scratch Junior, meaning coming up with activities and resources that support teachers or parents or siblings working with kids working with Scratch Junior. So this is one of our curricula that we've created. And I will say it's one of hopefully the first of many. So we really encourage, if anyone out there knows a lot about Scratch Junior transitioning to Scratch, has tried it in the classroom and said, this works, this doesn't work so well, please share your ideas. That's why we have Scratch Junior Connect out there. So I've put the link down at the bottom, and I'm sure Tess will be sharing it in the chat as well. So we encourage, this is just the beginning, essentially. This session is our way to kind of discuss what we should grow into, and we encourage everyone to kind of share out their resources as well, because transitioning from one fantastic tool to another is very necessary, and we want to make sure it's as easy as possible. So when do we know that a child is ready for Scratch? So probably the most obvious is mastery of the Scratch Junior language. And that can look very different for different children. It's not always going to be the same, but there are certain things that we look for that are pretty indicative that they have reached kind of the top level of complexity that they can get to with Scratch Junior. And so that would probably be some of the most complex blocks. I've put a few of them here, some of them being the send message and receive message blocks called broadcasting in Scratch, the repeat loops, some of the more complex like go to start blocks in the motion sensors, motion blocks, and then like start on bump. That's an introduction to a conditional and character interactions, utilizing the different pages that Scratch Junior offers. And then finally, that last picture I have, parallel programming. So when you play two programs at the same time for a character and watches those motions or whatever else the programs have kind of combine because they're being played at the same time. So all of those skills, if a child is using most of those in their Scratch Junior projects pretty consistently, we can be pretty confident that they're kind of mastering the language in front of them. And then finally as well, we look for the ability to debug. And so this is more just kind of computational thinking concepts in general. We want to make sure that they're applying those on to their work with Scratch Junior. So planning out their projects, debugging their projects when they don't work quite the way they want, or tweaking them, being able to communicate what their projects are trying to show, everything kind of that goes around the project as well. We want to see that the children are demonstrating a full understanding of everything they're doing before we kind of gently guide them into Scratch. And so that's kind of everything in terms of what to look for with actual Scratch Junior. And then there's also just some foundational skills that are necessary for Scratch that aren't necessarily necessary for Scratch Junior. So primarily being the ability to type, the ability to use a mouse or trackpad, and then the appropriate reading level. And so for typing and trackpad, I do want to say, I know that there are devices now that work with Scratch Junior that have keyboards, mice, etc. But for the most part, ScratchJr is still primarily being used by tablet users. So with that transition, we want to make sure that they're ready to go from a tablet to a computer or a laptop. And then my last point of appropriate reading level, this is probably the biggest one because if the child can't read the words on the Scratch blocks, that's a pretty big hindrance into being able to use Scratch. And that's one of the reasons why ScratchJr is so great, is because they can just see the pictures. So making sure the child doesn't have to have, a hugely robust vocabulary, but enough to understand what each of the blocks mean and say. And if you want to see the full checklist, as I said, you can go to that curriculum that we have linked at the bottom. And so here we have a few ideas of ways to transition with Scratch. So in one of the curriculums that we give, it gives a run through of block comparisons. So what a ScratchJr block would translate to in Scratch. And so this is just a few examples of them. We have plenty of them to go through, but we encourage you to kind of actually go through these block comparisons with children, or if not starting out with that comparison, kind of have it on hand as they work and say, oh, you're trying to do that. Let's see how this one shows it. So you'll see that the arrow to the right in ScratchJr ends up being point in the direction of 90 degrees and then move X amount of steps. And so that change is already quite complex, but if a child can kind of wrap their head around the few different steps, break it up and see how it connects, that's a good first step. And so then also introducing new vocabulary and concepts. So going back to the example I just gave, pointing in direction 90 degrees is already much more vocabulary than is asked of in ScratchJr. So we want to make sure the child understands degrees, the direction they're intending. Looking at that second example, we have send message for ScratchJr, and that translates to broadcast message in Scratch. So making sure that they understand the word broadcast and what that means, because while we as the creators of ScratchJr call the messaging blocks broadcasting blocks because we kind of know how it maps onto Scratch, when we're talking to the kids, we call it send message and receive message. And so we want to make sure that that translates well. And then finally, things like sprites. ScratchJr, we call them characters, and Scratch is sprites. So knowing that those are the same thing in this case. Yeah, and so then the final two things, as always, and of course, Scratch does a fantastic job of keeping their users pretty safe, but any sort of internet engagement is internet engagement, and users should go in with some sort of safe practices ready. So for transitioning, we'd say one conversation to have before a child gets on Scratch is just knowing how to interact with peers that maybe they don't know that they've met through the Scratch Studio, or knowing how to manage a username and password. Things like that is kind of just making sure the child is prepared to go from a tablet app that was just on their computer to a full website where they're interacting with others. And then finally, the pedagogy. This is true for ScratchJr and Scratch, that coding is a playground. It's supposed to be playful. It's a way to creatively express yourself. And we want to make sure that that transitions from ScratchJr to Scratch and carries on throughout. So keeping that for transition, and it'll all be good. So the curriculum I went through, it's kind of giving, that was more of the teacher instructions part of it, of knowing when and how to transition. And now here's actually an activity that it offers to help the kids transition. So it's kind of a planning activity of thinking through how a ScratchJr project could be transitioned and either recreated or expanded upon in Scratch. And so basically, ScratchJr, for the most part, is story-based. You can make some games and everything, but for the purposes of this one, we'll say that most projects are story-based in ScratchJr. And then in Scratch, this design sheet gives the option to add to the story. That could be different blocks, different characters, new backgrounds, things like that. You could make a game out of the story. So as I said, Scratch has a lot more interaction opportunities with characters, between characters, things like that. So kind of adding in an interactive element to the story, or just retelling your story in a more expansive way. So now we're going to transition. We're going to look at a ScratchJr project that Maddie created for us. And then we're going to talk through this design sheet together. And then we'll get to see Maddie create it in front of us. And we'll sort of talk through the different things that we notice and things to emphasize with children. So I'll go ahead and play this. Great. And so here, I'll play it one more time just so we see. So it's a 2-page story. They're all fish. And on the first page, I see sort of a start on bump interaction between that yellow and green fish. And then they go to the end and they're dancing. All right. So Maddie, what should we do? Let's think about this. How can we transition this from ScratchJr to Scratch?
Well, I'm thinking that we could turn the project into a game. So maybe turn it into like a Flappy Bird-esque game. For anyone that's familiar with that app, you have to tap on the bird to make it avoid the pipes. And so maybe we could have one fish or one sea creature try to avoid the other fish on the screen and try to move on to that second page that we saw in the original project on ScratchJr.
I like that because the second page of your ScratchJr project is very like celebratory. It makes me think of like you won the game, even though
like you win. Yes, it's very happy.
Cool.
Awesome.
Yeah, I like that. So before we jump into actually watching you share, I want to kind of think through, and here maybe we can go back. So in here on that first page, you're saying that you'll program kind of a fish to move and avoid pipes, you said, or other fish?
I was thinking other fish so that we could just keep like the same concepts from this game that I made on ScratchJr. So make it all fish, but make it kind of similar to Flappy Bird, except have one sea creature avoid some of the fish on the screen, and they're trying to get that fish, and they have to escape onto the second page or the next level.
Okay, fantastic. So still, yeah, keeping that page transition, but the next page is a level now instead of, okay. Great.
Yeah.
That sounds good.
Awesome.
All right, well, I will pass it over to you.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so you should all be able to see the Scratch website. And so here we have like a blank slate. I haven't programmed or made any scripts yet. And then here we see the sprites, as just mentioned. They're no longer called characters. So I'm actually going to delete our friendly Scratch cat. I'm going to add some sea creatures. So I'm going to go to the right hand bottom of the screen here, and I'm going to select choose a sprite. And then here you see that there is a much expanded version of the possible sprites you could choose from. So I'm going to look up sea creature and see what pops up. Okay, nothing pops up for that. I'll just type in sea. Okay, there we go. So let's see. Maybe I'll do this. The shark kind of looks scary, but we're gonna go with it. Okay, so I added my shark, and then I'm going to add some fish or sea creatures that need to try to avoid, or the shark needs to dodge in order to get to the next page or level. So I'm going to type in fish. So maybe we'll add a jellyfish. Ooh, angry jellyfish. And then I'll add maybe a pufferfish. And then maybe one more sea creature I'll add a clownfish. Okay. So now I'm just going to,
Can I jump in before you go? So I'm just already noticing that how I said typing was one of the necessary keys. So for the most part, you're still dragging and dropping, but for searching characters, you were typing to search. And so that's something that's not prevalent in ScratchJr, and one of the ways that the skill needs to be used for Scratch and not ScratchJr.
Yes, exactly. Thank you for bringing that up, Jess. So now I'm just going to click and drag all of our sea creatures and place them where I want on my page, and you can notice that the X and Y coordinates change as I move them and shift them around. And I'm also going to make them a bit smaller. So maybe change the size of shark to, let's see, size down to 60. Let's see what that looks way better, less intimidating shark. And then maybe I'll make these fish also around the same size. Yeah, that looks good. I'll change that for all the other sea creatures, changing them to size 70. Okay, great. So now we have all of our sprites that we want in our game. And so now we need a background. So I'm going to go ahead and add a backdrop. And the backdrop we had, or the background we had in ScratchJr was like underwater sea. So I'm going to go with that same theme here. Let's see, I like this one. Very bright and vibrant. There we go. Okay, it's starting to look more like a game now. Okay, so now I have all of my sprites and now it's time to program them. So I'm going to start with Shark. And so the goal of the game is for Shark to move to the other side of the page while avoiding all of these fish and sea creatures that are trying to catch it and approach Shark. So the first thing I'm going to do is, as you can see on the left side of the screen here, we have an expanded list of programming blocks. And so I'm going to click on events, which are our start blocks. And so these will start any of the scripts that we have. And I want to use the up and down and right and left arrow keys to make Shark move and to trigger Shark to move. So I'm going to go ahead and drag this when blank key is pressed. And I want Shark to move up. So I'm going to click on the up arrow in this menu list. So I'm going to select that option from the list. And so now I want Shark to move to the right forward, approaching the fish because it's trying to go to the other side. So now I'm going to go to the blue motion blocks. And let's see, I'm going to scroll down a little bit.
As you find that, I just want to say a few things about the blocks that I'm noticing. And I think I should have mentioned earlier, I think one really useful thing for starting out with ScratchJr Scratch is looking at the two interfaces next to each other and kind of having the child point out what looks similar and what looks different, because I think there are a lot of similarities, but because there are some, that makes the differences a little confusing. So what I'm noticing is that both ScratchJr and Scratch categorize their blocks by colors, but I'm actually seeing a lot more colors and a lot more categories on Scratch here. So I think kind of going through all of them and saying in ScratchJr, blue means motion, and in Scratch, blue means motion. But in ScratchJr, kind of a green means sound, but here green is operators and purpley pink is sound. So kind of emphasizing both the similarities, but also making sure that the children understand the differences, that this color means this in this setting, and this color means this in another setting. All right, great. Continue, Maddie. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Tess. Okay, so now I want Shark to move forward and I want it to point in that direction when it's moving forward. So I'm going to drag this point in direction block and I'm actually, let's see. So I want it to move towards the right. Yep, so we can just leave it just like that. So I want it to point in 90 degrees. And then I also want Shark to move forward every time, or I'm sorry, I want Shark to move up every time I press the up arrow. So now I need that block so that Shark actually moves. Okay.
Oh, so then I think it would probably be 0 degrees for that one if we're moving up.
Oh yeah, sorry. I'm thinking, yeah, you're totally right.
Yeah, no, you're good.
Awesome. Okay, so yep, it's gonna move in 0 degrees. And then I don't want Shark to move too fast. I want their movements to be a little bit shorter. So I'm actually going to make Shark move 5 steps instead of 10. So let's see what happens when we do that. So it should trigger Shark to move Yeah, there we go. Okay, so now I don't want shark to just continuously move up.
And Maddie, I have one question.
Uh-huh.
How many times did you just press the up arrow to get the shark to move up?
Once.
Did you press it once? Okay, and so we saw it move 5. Great.
Mhm.
Sounds good.
Awesome. So now I want shark to move right. And so I'm going to now drag, oops. I'm going to go back to the events programming block category, and then I'm going to drag this block again. And so you'll see that we're going to have multiple scripts running so that shark can move in different directions. And so now I'm going to select from the option menu the right arrow. So when right arrow key is pressed, and I'll just duplicate that so it's easier. And then now I want shark to be pointing 90 degrees. And I want shark to still move 5 steps. So now let's see when I press the right arrow, if it triggers that. And now shark is moving towards the fish, pointing 90 degrees. Okay, so now I want shark to be able to move down. So I'm going to drag another one of those, select the down arrow, and then I'll just duplicate the blocks that we used in the other 2 scripts. And then I'm going to change this so that shark is pointing down this time. So 180 degrees, and I still want it to move 5 steps every time I press the down arrow. So let's see. Yep.
Utilizing that visual for the degrees is a great way to introduce degrees, because we can guess probably if the child is just moving from ScratchJr to Scratch, that degrees is a pretty new concept. So let's kind of take advantage of the visual cues that both ScratchJr and Scratch are so good at, and help the children understand that they can see where the arrow is actually pointing, just like on the ScratchJr blocks, but this time it's translating into numbers rather than just seeing the arrows on the blocks.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so now I'm going to just add one more script to Shark's program. So now I'm just going to add left arrow. So I want Shark to be able to move backwards in case it's scared and wants to run away from the fish. And so I'm going to also duplicate this, the blue motion blocks, snap it below that orange event block. And then I want Shark to be able to go backwards. So that way and still move 5 steps each time I press the left arrow key. Oop, kind of something backwards, upside down. That's okay. That's cool. Okay, great. So now we've programmed shark. So now we can program all of our other fish. Okay, so starting with jellyfish's program. So I want them all to move at the same time towards shark. So for their program, I'm actually going to start on green flag. So when green flag is clicked, that will trigger their programs. And
I definitely recommend, sorry to jump in, but
yes, please.
The green flag is a great way to start, because that is ScratchJr has the green flag, and that's one of the first things kids learn on ScratchJr as well. So when in doubt, so show them that green flag and say, look, not too different. It's still a yellow block with a green flag, and that will start all your characters, just like Maddie said was the goal. All right, keep going. Let's see what the fish do.
And I actually want them to play like an ocean sound when I start their program. So maybe I can add like a little ocean wave sound. Let's see. Okay, so here I'm going to the purple sound blocks now, and I'm going to drag this piece right below. So when green flag is clicked, it's going to start playing an ocean wave sound until the ocean wave sound has finished playing. Okay, great. So now I'm going to add another when green flag is clicked block, and I want all the fish to move to the left, so towards shark. And I want them to keep going on and never stop. So I'm going to go back to these controls. So see here we have all of our conditional blocks. So I'm going to drag this forever block and drag it down right below when green flag is clicked. And I want it to move forever toward shark. So I'm going to go back to the blue motion blocks And
yeah, I'm noticing, so that forever loop is something that definitely is different between ScratchJr and Scratch, because in ScratchJr, we have an orange repeat loop that looks similar to that. But then we actually have the forever repeat loop in the red blocks. And there's actually no technical end blocks here because we just can tell from the shapes. But with ScratchJr, we have a specific category for those end blocks, and repeat forever is in there. So that's another difference to point out, is that looking closely at the shapes here on Scratch, because the kind of the sequencing that comes along with the blocks is communicated only in the shapes here, rather than in the shapes and the colors on ScratchJr. Great.
Awesome. Thank you, Jess. Okay, so now I want them to move to the left. So negative numbers are to the left of the page, and then positive numbers are to the right. So I wanted to move -1 steps each time forever and never stop. And I'm actually going to just duplicate that script. Oop. And can I, yeah, and just drag it to, can I drag it to Pufferfish? Yeah. And I'm going to do the same.
Which is also a feature on ScratchJr, which is nice.
Mm-hmm.
Like copying scripts, you can just drag.
I don't know why Jellyfish is a little ahead of the game. Go back there. It's cheating. Okay, so great. I think I've programmed all of the fish and the sprites. So let's see. Let's see how our game looks so far. So I'm going to go ahead and press green flag. Yay. Okay, great. So now we just need to add a script where when Shark touches the edge of the screen, it's going to go to the next backdrop. So I'm going to go ahead and put them back where they were. Click and drag. Okay, so I'm going to go back to Shark's program now. And so now I'm just going to add to this when right arrow key is pressed script. And I'm going to go back to the orange control blocks. So again, you see all of our conditionals, and I'm going to go ahead and drag this if blank then, and I'm going to drag it right below and snap it onto the move 5 steps block. Okay, so now what we want Shark to do is, if it is touching the edge of the screen, then I want it to go to the next page. So notice that I need a block here. And so I'm actually going to go to sensing. And then I'm going to drag this light blue touching blank sensing block. And notice that it fits perfectly in this shape right here. So if...
Yeah. That's a great example of how Scratch and ScratchJr are similar, and Scratch just takes it one step further. So as I've said a few times, is both of them use the shapes of blocks to communicate different functions of them. So with ScratchJr, it means that they're curved on either the left or the right if they're end blocks, and then they're puzzle pieces in the middle. And here, there's just more shapes to indicate that. So now you'll see this kind of diamondy rhombus shape for all these variables that go in there. So emphasizing that shapes still are telling us the function of the blocks, but there are even more in Scratch, and kind of going over those new ones with the kids as you start.
Exactly. Thanks. Awesome. Yeah, thank you. Okay, great. So now that we have this blue shape inserted into the if block, I want Shark to go to the next page when it's touching the edge. So I'm going to actually select from the menu options, edge. So if touching edge, then go to next backdrop. So I'm going to go to the looks programming blocks, and then I'm going to scroll down a little bit, and you see it right here. And notice that, as Jess was explaining, this shape fits perfectly here inside the if block. And so now when the right arrow key is pressed, and then when it's touching the edge, it's going to go to the next backdrop. Okay, but now we need a next backdrop. Oh,
Yeah, so no, continue adding the backdrop. I think I'm just going to note about that is this is a significant difference between ScratchJr and Scratch, is that ScratchJr does backdrops on pages. So you can add up to 4 pages, and each page not only can have a different background, but also has a whole new set of characters and programs. So programs on each page in ScratchJr are individual. So it kind of helps for the age group that we're focusing on. They can really kind of just focus on this program will go on this page, this program will go on this page. And that's actually pretty different for here because we're just changing the backdrop, and that just adds in to our programs that we're already making. So continue. And I love the backdrop you chose.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I thought it'd be fun, to end up on Malibu as the next level or like congratulations screen. Okay, so now we have our next backdrop, and I'm gonna go ahead and select the backdrop tab from the upper left-hand corner here. And I wanna add some text so that whoever's playing my game knows that they won and that they're gonna go to the next level. So I'll just select it right here so they can see it in the sand. It's like I'm drawing it in the sand, So I'm gonna go ahead and say, you win. Okay, and then I'll change the color of the text. I'll make it, black, and then maybe change this boring font a little. Oh, why not?
Yeah, and as you change that font, I'll just say a few things that I'm noticing. I mentioned that the layouts are pretty different, but also as I'm actually looking at it, I'd forgotten about this, but not only are the layouts different, but some of the functions that are blocks in ScratchJr are just parts of the interface on Scratch. So I'm seeing here you have the sprite name, but then you can also adjust the position X and Y, whereas on ScratchJr, you can just drag it around with your finger. You can also choose to show or hide it. Those are blocks on ScratchJr. And you can adjust the size and the direction, both of which can be changed by blocks on ScratchJr. So just showing kids that this is possible, not necessarily only through blocks, but they can also do it just on the interface itself right below the stage on Scratch.
Okay, so now I'm back to where we started. So I'm back to our underwater backdrop, and I just finished customizing or editing the second backdrop. I just had it say you win in like this pixel font. Okay, so now I'm gonna go back and let's play. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead, select my shark, and then we're gonna click on green flag. Yay, we win.
Nice job. Fantastic. And there's always more that you can add both in ScratchJr and in Scratch. But I think this was a great example of just taking a fairly simple project in ScratchJr and making a pretty fun game on Scratch. It's still simple in the world of everything that Scratch can do, but it's always a good starting point for kids of knowing that this program that we made at ScratchJr and this program we made in Scratch look pretty similar. If we look at the blocks themselves, that's where it starts to get different. But if we watch the two screens, they're looking kind of the same, making those connections to kids pretty clear. So, and before I continue, Tess, do you have any notes that I missed when we were watching the project?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, great, fantastic. So now, we're going to wrap up and we will have some time for questions. I know that there's some in the chat that maybe we'll go through, but I just want to give some acknowledgements first before we end. So thank you, as always, to our bosses at DevTech Research Group and everyone that we work with, as well as the Scratch Foundation and Lifelong Kindergarten and Playful Invention Company that were huge players in the creation of ScratchJr. And then, of course, the NSF grant that let this all happen. So we encourage you to engage with us in many ways. So here are our two websites. We've got our DevTech website, but then also the ScratchJr website. We have our two mailing lists, DevTech and ScratchJr, our Twitters, as Tess mentioned. And then also I gave the link to the existing curriculum and ScratchJr Connect. And I can't emphasize enough how much I want everyone to engage on ScratchJr Connect, because it's kind of a group effort. As much as we want to put out everything that there is, we know that teachers in the classroom or parents with their kids are seeing it firsthand and are always going to have other ideas. And we want to hear those ideas. So if you have projects from today, please go ahead. I mean, if they're Scratch projects, post them on Scratch. If they're ScratchJr projects, post them on ScratchJr Connect. And if they're activity ideas or plans or anything like that, throw them on ScratchJr Connect, and we'd love to see them. So now we will take some time for some questions. So Tess, if there's anything in the chat, feel free to say it here and we can talk about it, or if there's anything else.
I know people are asking, we're going to post the projects in a minute. So hang tight on that. And does anyone have any other questions? So we post in the chat. Does anyone have any, or do we have any online summer ScratchJr camps for students? We don't this year, but they, so
yeah, we absolutely will.
That we'll have again. We've had them in the past. We'll have them again in the future. We just aren't running them this year, unfortunately.
Yeah, for background, and you'll see a link change eventually, is our group is at Tufts University right now, and we're transitioning to Boston College in the fall. So our lab, where we usually host all of our summer camps, is full of boxes right now. So next summer we will certainly be back, and we might even have some opportunities during the year, like, you know, after school workshops and things like that. So certainly reach out and join our mailing lists, and we'll be messaging about that. I think, Tess, I know you answered this maybe in the chat, but was there a question about the left to right versus up down?
Oh, yes. Yeah, so there was a question about helping students transition from the left to right of ScratchJr and the up to down of Scratch. One of the benefits of both ScratchJr and of Scratch is that the puzzle pieces of the block-based coding language, are puzzle pieces. So in the ScratchJr language, if you can go back to the interfaces slide, Jess.
Yep, absolutely. Let me just there we go.
That you can see the puzzle pieces of the blocks fit together in both languages. And so it is intuitive. You can help your students see that it's intuitive to put the blocks together in both languages. And from a literacy standpoint, when we're learning to read, we begin by reading words and sentences only going left to right. But as we begin to read more complex things, we go from one line to the next line to the next line. And each line of code on Scratch is, we consider one line of text. And then after that line, you can go to the next line, building whole programs or paragraphs.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great way to put it. Sentences to paragraphs, picture books to chapter books, things like that, that they're going to be reading line by line instead of just straight across. Yeah, are there any other questions?
Sorry, what grade? Oh, no, is there two other questions that were asked? Oh, I'm going through in things. Can ScratchJr be used to link and control the movements of small robots? Unfortunately, no.
Yeah, we had some research about that in the past. So DevTech's other technology is Kibo robotics. And there was a past project about connecting ScratchJr to other robots, but it didn't take off in the way we'd hoped, but that it is in discussion. So right now ScratchJr is being looked at by a fantastic team. Oh yeah.
Oh, I see the questions are in the questions tab, not just in the chat. That does make it a lot easier to read. Thank you for whoever pointed that out. Awesome. Okay. Are there plans to upload our own sprites into the ScratchJr environment, maybe as a user or a teacher, to push to students? Many want to use sprites they've created in other applications within ScratchJr.
Yeah, so the customization on ScratchJr it's pretty wide, but it was intentional to limit it a little bit, just because, like I said, like the attention span of the users, and it might go down a rabbit hole of adding many characters and never getting to the actual programming. So that's the reason why it's limited. We definitely take that feedback into account in the kind of the design of the next ScratchJr generation. But I will, for now, I would say the best workaround is that you can use the camera function in ScratchJr. So that's kind of ScratchJr's way of importing characters. So short answer is no, we can't import into ScratchJr, but workaround answer is that you can kind of create any character and then fill in areas with the camera function, so you can kind of create your own from that. I hope that helps.
I saw a question about, will the links, all the Tufts links, remain live? The answer is yes. They'll just forward you over.
Yep, there will be a redirect, so no problem with saving Tufts links. It'll just jump over.
Are there ways to export pieces or programs from ScratchJr to Scratch?
Not yet. That's a goal though. So this, as I said at the beginning, this session is just the beginning of the ScratchJr to Scratch connection. And so ultimately we would love to have ways to transition those in. But as you saw from, let's see, this switch slide here, the exporting to importing would be a little complex for just to do automatically. And I think there's really something to be said for having the kids think through these translations together, you know? So looking at a ScratchJr block, and instead of exporting and importing it and having it being translated into Scratch, having the kids do it themselves. I know that's not the perfect answer, because there's many opportunities where we would want to import things and have them work in both ScratchJr and Scratch. But the main answer is not yet, and I will say hopefully in the future.
I see there's a question about assessing ScratchJr projects when there's a large number of children and a smaller number of iPads. Is that more of a logistical question or a question about searching for an assessment? Because
yeah,
we can answer both components of it.
Yeah, you go ahead, Tess.
Yeah. So for the assessment component of it, we have a rubric for assessing ScratchJr projects, and the rubric can be completed if you haven't found it or if you haven't used it to assess the logistical. Okay, so we do have a rubric for assessing projects, but my guess is from that question it would be more of a logistical question. I don't know if you have an answer, Jess, or otherwise.
Yeah, so definitely utilizing, so you're saying there's a limited amount of iPads. So I would definitely try to utilize the export function that ScratchJr does have and getting them all onto OneDrive, because in addition to being able to email the projects, you can also just upload them straight to Drive. You have to select the email option, and then it'll show you an option of apps to use. So you could have the projects go to OneDrive, and then all the student projects would be there. I think that's answering logistical, but happy to chat more offline. We're all on SwapCard as well, so feel free to message us.
I would also, if you can, even if you're working off of each iPad at a time, to not have to go through the process of exporting I would use the feature of naming within the exporting and make sure to name each project, even if just with the child's name. Where can we find the rubric? We will post that. I don't have that.
Yeah, we will post the link. Tess, you can go ahead and find it now, but I'll say that it is on, if you go to that top link that we have, sites.tufts.edu/devtech, and go to our research and then our validated instruments.
Mhm.
And the validated instruments page is where you can find all of the instruments that we've created for evaluating ScratchJr and computational thinking in different ways. There's an application process for it, but we'll get right back to you and approve you for the training and everything like that, and you can be certified.
And it's pretty quick once the first couple projects when you're going through take a bit of time, as with any rubric, but once you do it, it's pretty quick to grade any project. Oh, she can't use the export function because of email capabilities. So in that case, I would use the export function just to name the projects. You can save the projects by each child's name and then just go through one iPad at a time. It seems like your issue is the number of projects as well. And so just making sure to name the projects, and the rubric will help reduce the amount of time, which hopefully will help.
Yeah, and I will say the project sharing, I'll say difficulties with ScratchJr are known. And so we're definitely working on that for the next iteration of ScratchJr. So your troubles are heard, I promise.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the time. We've only got a few more minutes. So maybe one more question, Tess, and then we can wrap up.
Yeah. I'm looking for, are there any other questions in the question section? I think we got all the, is there the best way to compare the two interfaces, two laptops next to each other or two windows next to each other when presenting them to students?
I would say so, two windows next to each other, but the caveat there is that ScratchJr is not yet available in a web-based version, so it wouldn't be able to do that. So right now, I would say having two devices is probably the best way. Yep.
I would say if you have the technological capability to do so, you can zoom in on a device with an iPad and screen share with an iPad on half of a screen and have Scratch up on the other half. It takes a little bit, you have to like log in, which will take a couple minutes, but it is a way to have both a ScratchJr up on a computer projected next to Scratch.
And if you want to go an easier route and that's harder, of course, this isn't going to be as interactive, but kind of just like what we did today of just different screenshots of parallel screens, looking at just the images and having children say, what do you notice on this screen? Of course, that won't get at the different like interaction and seeing how it's acting, but there's a lot of different ways to compare with kids, and they'll get the gist. And once they start practicing with it, I think it'll come a little more naturally.
And final question is, will this talk be available for video on recorded?
Yes,
so people will be able to find the chat. Yes, or the video.
Sounds good.
All
yeah,
right.
so it will be available. Thank you everyone so much. And my last point I want to emphasize, as I've said a couple times, is this is just the beginning. So we are so excited about transitioning and supporting the transition from ScratchJr to Scratch. And we've showed you what we have so far, and we really hope to build on it with help from everyone, so we'll be working on it, but we'd love to hear experiences from teachers and parents and anyone else working with ScratchJr and Scratch and just trying things out. I think, as I said, the most important thing is remembering that they're both fun, creative coding platforms, and that the kids are just testing things out. If it doesn't go great the first time, that's okay. Tinkering is more than welcome on both platforms, and they will have already gotten those skills on ScratchJr. And so just reminding them that that's totally okay at Scratch too. Okay, well, fantastic. Thank you, everyone. We will all be on swap card if you need us, but other than that, we will head out. Have a wonderful rest of the Scratch conference.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.